When I moved into the college apartment, I was relieved to have a quiet roommate. His name was Lucas, a quiet guy, always keeping to himself, who spent most of his time locked in his room studying. He wasn't the type to go out to parties or bring people home. At first, I even found it a relief. I needed peace to focus on my studies. But as time passed, I started noticing strange things. Small details that, alone, didn't seem like much, but together created an odd feeling, an uncomfortable unease that was hard to explain. The first thing that caught my attention was the fact that Lucas never left his room at night. No matter how late I came back or how many late nights I spent in the living room watching TV shows, his door always stayed closed. I never saw him leave to go to the bathroom, never heard him in the kitchen grabbing something to eat. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to get some water and spend a few minutes in the kitchen, waiting for some sign of life. Nothing. It was as if, after a certain hour, he simply stopped existing. I tried to ignore this oddity for a while, but then I started noticing other things. Small details that together formed a disturbing pattern. Every time I left the room and came back, I felt like something was different. My chair seemed slightly displaced, my drawers a bit open, my bed with the sheets slightly pulled. At first I thought I was just imagining things. Maybe I was messing things up without realizing it. But then I started testing it. I'd leave objects in specific positions before leaving. A pen across a notebook, a book tilted on the table, and when I came back, they were always in different places. That's when I decided to test it for real. One night, I pretended to go to bed early. I lay down, stayed still, and waited. The apartment was in absolute silence. Time passed slowly, and the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Then around 3 a.m. I heard it. A subtle click. My bedroom door opening slowly. My pulse raced, but I stayed still, pretending to be asleep. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow moving slowly. Someone was there. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard. The shadow stopped beside my bed. Lucas. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his posture was rigid, almost mechanical. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at me in the dark. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to react, but a primitive fear paralyzed me. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there staring at me. Then slowly he bent down. I felt the edge of the mattress sink slightly. He was inches from my face. My breath got stuck in my throat. The only thing that kept me from freaking out was the fact that he didn't seem to realize I was awake. After a few seconds, or minutes, I don't know, he stood up again. The mattress returned to normal, and I heard his light footsteps leaving the room. The door clicked shut. I waited for another hour before gathering the courage to move. When I finally got up, I went straight to the door. I locked it, but my body was still trembling. What was he doing there? And more importantly, how many nights had this happened without me knowing? The next morning I woke up feeling heavy, as if I hadn't slept at all, and actually I hadn't. My mind kept spinning with the events of the night before. I tried to act normally, but something inside me had changed. I knew I needed to find out what was going on, so that night I planned something different. Before going to bed, I set up my phone in a strategic corner of the room with the camera recording. If he came in again, I'd have proof. I lay there, pretending to sleep while time passed slowly. The silence of the night swallowed the apartment. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard the door open again. My skin crawled. This time I didn't look. I just waited. Time passed and I felt the edge of the mattress sink again. He was there, but something was different. The air seemed heavier, as if his presence was closer than before. I held my breath, hoping he would leave, like the night before. But this time, he did something that completely froze me. He whispered my name. The whisper was low, drawn out, almost like a cold breath against my skin. I know you're awake. My whole body locked up. A shiver ran up my spine like an electric shock. He knew. I felt my heart almost stop, my breath caught in my throat. The silence that followed was even worse. He didn't move. He stood there beside me, watching me in the dark. I didn't know what to do. If I reacted and I didn't even want to finish that thought. I just waited. Waited for something, anything. But all that came was the oppressive feeling that I was completely defenseless. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, I heard his slow footsteps moving away. The door to my room clicked shut. I waited a few more minutes before moving, my hands sweating so much I almost dropped the phone when I grabbed it. I stopped the recording and started watching. At first, everything seemed normal. The dark room, my body still on the bed. But when the clock struck exactly 3:12 a.m., the door opened by itself. My skin crawled as I saw Lucas entering slowly, moving with an unnatural rigidity. He stood beside the bed, just looking at me. But then something happened, something that made my stomach turn. He didn't have a face. The image on the video trembled slightly, but there was no denying what I was seeing. Where Lucas's face should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. My body froze. How was this possible? I knew he was there every morning, that he spoke to me, that he existed. But in the recording, he was just a faceless silhouette. I kept watching, completely terrified. In the video, he bent down beside the bed, exactly like I had felt. But, unlike what I remembered, he didn't just stand still. He raised his hand and slowly brought it closer to my face, his fingers stiff, as if about to touch me. Before that could happen, he froze. Then he turned his head at an impossible angle, looking directly at the camera. A chill ran through my body. He knew I was recording. In the video, his head stayed tilted for a few seconds, as if he were analyzing the situation. Then, without warning, he moved too quickly, in a fraction of a second, toward the camera. The screen went black. The recording stopped by itself. My heart raced. What the hell was living with me? My mind was in chaos. I couldn't think straight anymore. If Lucas wasn't human, then what was he? My instincts screamed at me to leave immediately, but at the same time I knew I needed to confront him. I needed answers. The sun started to rise, and I spent the whole time sitting on the bed, holding my phone as if it could protect me. When I heard the door to his room open in the morning, my pulse quickened. I slowly left my room and went to the kitchen, where he was already, as if nothing had happened. Lucas looked at me and gave a slight smile, but now that smile sent shivers down my spine. I tried to act normally, but every fiber of my body wanted to run. I grabbed a glass of water and with a trembling voice asked, "Did you leave your room last night?" He stared at me for a moment as if choosing his words. Then he smiled again and said, "No, I never leave at night." The glass almost fell from my hand. My heart beat so hard I thought he could hear it. He kept watching me, as if he knew I knew, as if he were waiting to see what I would do next. Every instinct inside me screamed that I needed to leave. But for some reason, I stayed still, staring at Lucas, trying to find some crack in the mask he wore, if it was a mask. I forced myself to give a tense smile, as if I believed him. "Oh, sorry. I guess I had a weird dream." He didn't answer. He just kept looking at me with that same small, controlled smile, a smile that now seemed trained. My stomach turned. I knew I couldn't spend another night there. I had to leave before he realized I knew. I spent the entire day locked in my room, packing my things and thinking of a plan. I couldn't just leave without giving an explanation he'd notice. I waited until the late afternoon and sent him a message. "My family needs me. I'll be gone for a few days." No reply. The sun began to set and my body tensed. Time was running out. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. I crept toward the exit door as quietly as possible. But when my hand touched the doorknob, a low voice sounded behind me. "You don't need to go." My skin crawled. I knew I didn't want to look, but I looked anyway. Lucas was standing at the end of the hallway, still watching me. But this time something was different. He looked bigger. Don't know how to explain it. But his silhouette was wrong, subtly elongated, as if his body were trying to adjust to the space. The hallway seemed narrower, darker. My heart beat so fast I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. "I already told my family," I tried to say, forcing my voice to sound normal. But he didn't answer. He just stood there, smiling. That's when I noticed. His feet weren't touching the floor. My lungs closed up. The air felt heavier, as if something was pulling me back. He wasn't real. Never was. In a pure survival instinct, I turned the doorknob with force and ran down the hallway, not looking back. My heart beat so hard it hurt my chest. When I reached the street, I kept running, ignoring everything, until I turned the corner and saw people, cars, normal life. Only then did I realize I was crying, because deep down, a part of me knew that thing living with me wouldn't let me go that easily. My only concern was getting as far away from that apartment as possible. I took a taxi to a cheap hotel and stayed awake all night, trying to understand what I had just experienced. If Lucas was never human, then what the hell had been living with me all that time? I spent the whole night rewatching the video, pausing, advancing frame by frame, and that's when I noticed a detail that made me want to vomit. When he got close to the camera before the recording cut off for a fraction of a second, his face started to change, his features distorted, turning into something that seemed like me. I turned off the phone immediately. He was trying to copy me. Panic took over me. I knew I could never go back to that apartment. The next morning, I sent a message to the landlord saying I was quitting the lease and could leave all my things behind. I never wanted to know what happened to that place. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with a strange feeling, a chill down my spine, a sense that something is watching me, and no matter how hard I try to avoid it, I always end up looking at myself in the mirror, just to make sure it's still me. Story 2. When we found that house to rent, it seemed like too good of a deal to be true. It was spacious, well located, and had a price much lower than the market rate. My girlfriend Clara and I moved in without thinking twice. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house had an old charm, with creaky wooden floors beneath our feet and huge windows that let the sun in. But after a few weeks, small things started to bother us. Strange sounds at night, as if something was moving inside the walls. Doors that seemed slightly ajar when we were sure we had closed them, but we always found an excuse. "It's an old house, it makes noise," Clara would say. Then one night, everything changed. I was sweeping the hallway when I hit the floor with the broom and heard a hollow sound. I stood still for a moment, frowning. The sound seemed to come from the floor. Curious, I knelt down and hit again. Definitely, there was something underneath. I called Clara, and together we started dragging the huge rug that covered the hallway. That's when we found the trap door. The wood was worn and the lock seemed old, as if no one had opened it in years. We looked at each other in silence. Neither of us knew there was a basement there, and somehow I felt like we shouldn't open it. But of course curiosity got the better of us. I grabbed a screwdriver and forced the rusty lock. After a few attempts, the latch gave way with a sharp click, and the trapdoor slowly opened, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down to a basement that shouldn't have existed. A strange smell rose from below, damp, thick, with a metallic touch, like rust or blood. Clara hesitated. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered, grabbing my arm. But I had already gone too far to stop. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and illuminated the space below. The beam of light revealed dirty stone walls, dusty shelves, and a table in the center of the room, with something covered by a dark sheet. We descended slowly, each step creaking beneath our feet. The air grew colder with each step. My chest felt tight with a strange sensation, as if we were being watched. When we reached the bottom, Clara stayed behind while I approached the table. My heart was pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? With a quick motion, I pulled the sheet, and what we saw underneath made Clara let out a muffled scream. It was clothes, but not ordinary clothes. They were modern, clean, and exactly like the ones we had in the wardrobe upstairs. My mind short-circuited. What were our clothes doing there? Clara took a step back, covering her mouth with her hand. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, her voice trembling. I moved closer to the table, trying to understand. The clothes were folded perfectly, as if someone had placed them there carefully. But then, something even worse caught my attention. There were 2 toothbrushes next to the clothes. Our toothbrushes. My stomach turned. I looked at Clara, and from her expression I realized she was also understanding. Someone had been in our house. Someone had come down to this basement and brought our things here. A chill ran down my spine. I turned the phone flashlight toward the rest of the basement, trying to see if there was anything else. That's when Clara yanked my arm hard. "We need to get out of here, now." I was about to agree, but then a detail made me stop. At the back of the basement there was an old mattress, and next to it, a tray with dirty plates and utensils. Someone was living down there. The air grew heavy, Oppressive. I turned slowly to Clara. We weren't alone in that house. We never were. My throat went dry. Someone was living under there, right beneath our feet. Every night we slept in that house. Every strange noise we ignored. It wasn't the wood creaking. It wasn't the old house. It was someone. Clara was already heading up the stairs when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A sigh. Low, drawn out, coming from the back of the basement. My flashlight was still pointing at the mattress, and that's when I noticed. The sheet was slightly raised, as if someone had just gotten out of it. I didn't wait to see anything else. I rushed up the stairs so fast I tripped on the last step. Clara was already holding the trapdoor, ready to close it, when we heard footsteps coming from below. Not running, not frantic, just slow, calculated steps. As if whoever was down there knew we had discovered them. As if they weren't worried about it at all. The moment Clara slammed the trapdoor shut, we ran for the front door and fled the house. I didn't even have the courage to lock it. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. We ran to the car without looking back. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the key when I tried to start the engine. Clara stared at the house door, waiting. I don't know for what. For someone to come out. For something to move in the windows. But the house stayed still, as if nothing had happened. As if it didn't hide a terrifying secret beneath the hallway floor. The engine finally roared to life, and I sped away without a second thought. Neither of us said anything on the way. The silence inside the car was suffocating, filled with thoughts neither of us wanted to put into words. We only stopped when we reached the nearest hotel, almost 50 kilometers away. That night, no one slept. Clara curled up on the bed, hugging her knees while I tried to find some information about the house online. But there was nothing. No mention of a hidden basement, no strange detail in the property's description. It was as if that place had never existed. But we knew the truth. We saw the clothes, the dishes, the mattress. Someone was down there. Someone who knew about us. And what scares me the most to this day, someone who might still be waiting for new tenants. Story 3. I've always been the type of person who doesn't get too bothered by small things, especially when I'm traveling for work. That day was no different. I was in the middle of a tiring trip, passing through a small town that barely showed up on the map, and I had to make a last-minute reservation at a modest hotel. It was a simple place, with thin walls and a musty smell mixed with cleaning products, but nothing that bothered me. I ate there. Didn't want to risk going out to unfamiliar places. What I didn't expect was that this night would end up making me more nervous than all the work meetings I'd had up to that point. When I returned to my room, it was already dark, and the whole town seemed to be sleeping. Something caught me off guard when I opened the door. It was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it when I left, but I thought it was just paranoia. I took a deep breath, closed and locked it again, thinking everything was fine, as if it were something trivial. I went to the bed, started undressing, and getting ready to sleep. But then a soft sound, like a faint creak, came from the closet, making me stop. That feeling, a mix of exhaustion with an odd unease I couldn't explain. I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the closet. I didn't know exactly what I expected to hear, but that sound didn't leave me at ease. It was as if something was moving inside, as if someone was trying to be discreet but couldn't. I thought about checking, but something inside me told me not to, that it was just my mind playing tricks. I was already too exhausted to deal with it, and tried to ignore the sound. I lay back in bed, pulled the sheets up to my neck, and closed my eyes. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every time the noise stopped, I felt a shiver down my spine, as if the tension were suffocating me, just waiting for the right moment to explode. Sleep was difficult. I tossed and turned in bed, waking up from time to time, unable to relax. When I finally fell asleep, it was almost dawn. That's when the sound came back. It was no longer a subtle creak. Now it was clearer, more intense, as if something or someone was really moving inside the closet, trying to get out. My eyes snapped open immediately, and a wave of panic took over me. I slowly got out of bed, barely breathing, and approached the closet. Each step seemed to echo in the empty room, creating an oppressive silence. When I finally reached the closet door, my hand was shaking. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to see. When I opened the door, everything was quiet. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air was heavy as if something had just been there, watching me. I stood there for a few seconds motionless, trying to understand what had just happened. Whatever had been making that noise wasn't there anymore. I even thought it could have been just the result of my tired mind, but something told me it wasn't. I closed the closet door with a sigh of relief, trying to convince myself that I was just paranoid and that maybe it was better to try to sleep again. The feeling of being watched didn't pass, but with great effort, I climbed back into bed. It didn't take long for me to finally fall asleep. However, when I woke up in the morning, something was wrong. The daylight entered through the window, but my body was tense, as if something had kept me in place the entire night. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and when I returned to the room, I saw that my suitcase had been tampered with. That wasn't all. The zipper was open and some items inside were out of place. Something had moved my things. I went to the table where I kept my car keys, and to my surprise, they were gone. My heart raced. The idea that someone had invaded my room while I slept made me tremble in a way I had never felt before. I tried to stay calm, thinking I might have left the keys somewhere without realizing it, but the feeling that something was completely out of place wouldn't leave me. I looked around the room, but I didn't find anything else unusual. No window was open, the door was still locked. So how had the keys disappeared? And how had no one heard anything? My thoughts began to revolve around the idea that something sinister had really happened that night, but I didn't know what exactly it was. I decided I should check the outside area of the hotel. Maybe something had happened while I was out for dinner. I went to the parking lot and walked toward my car, still trying to think of a logical explanation for what was going on. When I got to the car, I noticed the door was slightly open. I was sure I had locked it. My heart started beating faster. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was nearby, but the parking lot was empty. There were no signs that anyone had tried to steal anything. Nothing was out of place except for the doors, the keys, and that growing sense of insecurity. I quickly went back to my room and started searching through everything. I went to the closet again, even though I knew it didn't make sense, but the feeling of suspicion was stronger than reason. That's when I noticed something that really made me freeze. Inside my closet, in a hidden corner, was a small pile of folded clothes. I hadn't put anything there. There was no reason for that to be there. My heart nearly stopped. I quickly lifted the clothes, with an indescribable fear growing inside me, and what I found was even worse. A shirt in a color I didn't recognize, dirty and wrinkled. But the scariest thing was the smell. It was a strong odor, mixing sweat with something sweet, a scent you couldn't ignore. My fingers trembled as I held that shirt, and a sense of dread filled me. Someone had been there, someone who shouldn't have been. I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Something truly strange was going on, and I was at the center of it. But the worst was yet to come. With the shirt in my hand, I quickly returned to the bed, trying to gather my thoughts. Suddenly, the noise came again. Now, louder, clearer, coming from the hallway. It was a rhythmic sound, as if someone was walking slowly, but with heavy steps, as if they were dragging themselves. What completely terrified me was the fact that the hallway was completely silent. There was no one out there. I went to the door and peeked through the crack. Nothing, but that sound. It seemed to be coming from inside the hotel, as if someone were wandering through the rooms. The panic started to take over me in an immense way. What was I doing there? Who else could be in an empty hotel at that hour of the night? I carefully descended the stairs, the sound in my ears now louder, and when I reached the reception, I saw something that made me freeze. The attendant was there, but he seemed to be in a deep trance, as if he were completely oblivious to what was happening around him. His eyes were glazed over, fixed on a point on the wall, as if he was waiting for something. The feeling that I wasn't alone on those stairs paralyzed me. I approached, but before I could ask anything, he slowly got up, without saying a word, and headed toward the back door. I didn't know what to do. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I didn't want to stay there to find out what might happen next. I rushed back to my room as quickly as I could with the feeling that I was being followed, as if that strange man were watching me from every corner. When I got there, the door was slightly open again. It didn't make sense. I had locked the door before leaving. A mix of anger and fear took over me. I decided I couldn't wait or ignore it any longer. I went straight to the closet again. searched through everything more carefully and, to my surprise, found something even more disturbing. A crumpled note inside the drawer, written by hand in a handwriting I didn't recognize. It simply said, "You shouldn't have looked." The terror spread through my whole body, and I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. I didn't understand what was happening, but now I knew I was being watched in some way, by someone who had already invaded my space several times. My instinct was to leave immediately. Without thinking twice, I grabbed what I could, including the strange shirt, and ran out of the room without looking back. I went down to the reception, where the attendant was sitting again, now with a blank look, as if nothing had happened. I went to the door and almost slammed into it, but when I opened it, I came face to face with something that made me stop completely. In the parking lot, I saw a car parked with its lights on. The strangest thing? There was no one inside. The car was old, seemed abandoned, but it was there, right next to mine, as if it were waiting for me. The fear I felt in that moment was indescribable. I didn't know what was real anymore and what wasn't. What happened that night never made sense, but one thing I know: I never went back to that hotel. I sat in my car without thinking about anything, just trying to stay calm. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the hotel in the distance, looking more and more like a prison. The smell of the shirt I had found still burned my nostrils. Even with the car's engine on and ready to leave, I still felt that something was wrong. It was as if something had followed me there, waiting for the right moment to grab me. I looked again at the parking lot. The empty car was now just a few meters from me. The feeling of being watched never left me. But with one last look at that cursed hotel, I accelerated the car and lost myself on the road. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on with my life, but I couldn't get the image of that car out of my head. The smell of the shirt, the vacant look of the attendant, and most of all, the feeling that somehow I still wasn't completely free. I never knew who was behind that night or exactly what happened there. But one thing is certain: I never trusted roadside hotels again, or any place where I couldn't feel truly safe. To this day, I don't have answers, just the certainty that that night, something or someone was watching me. And the worst part is, I still feel like it's lurking, waiting for the right moment to return.